So do the, or
Go ahead.
if you already started a question,
No, sorry, go ahead.
do the online people like submit, like how do they do their?
No, they listen to it, but they're not submitting feedback like you guys do here in class. It's just part of the reality of online. But they're submitting to me case studies that they've chosen.
Okay.
So they don't have the same group discussion, you know, but yeah, they're still participating. All right, Isaac and Cody.
All right. So we had Bonanza or Black Market. So essentially we have this committee for the Asian Evangelical Mission Board. And they've seen some rising inflation costs, and transferring money is more and more expensive through the government, and it's making it really hard to continue their ministry work because they've had to raise the salaries of the missionaries just to meet the rising costs of food and things like that. So that's caused a distinct lack of funds. They start talking around, and one of their colleagues from another mission organization says that they had started to exchange on the free market. They were very clear. It's not the black market. That's a separate thing. This is the free market. And there's this company that the churches back home can give money to. Then they'll give them, the missionaries, rupees in whatever country they're in, which would probably be India, because I did some research there, so that would be India most likely. So it seems a little questionable, but like from what they see, there's nothing blatantly wrong with it. They've kind of got to decide if this is actually wrong and if it's kind of acceptable or not.
So there are several people involved in the situation. First was the committee, the Asian Evangelical Mission Board, which was Sarah, Philip, Steve, and Mary. And then they have to decide on whether to listen to the other missionary organization or the man from there. And then the government, probably of India, plays an important role as well. The issues that we came up with was whether transferring the money in this way of the free market, like he was talking about before, was illegal. If it is illegal, is it okay to break the law? Does the good justify the breaking of the unjustly used law? And even if it's okay, would mar the organization's Christian reputation? So we came up with some alternates and like what they could do. So it's either they can use the free market or not use it and continue to the government's approved exchange. I went mostly on the free market side, or I researched the free market side. So there are several key reasons why the free market would be a good option. It would allow the missionaries to reach more people. Romans 10:14 through 15 says that people need to go out with the gospel in order for people to get saved. So if they have more money, that's more time and effort that they can put into ministry. And with the extra money, that would not have to take most of the budget to give it to the missionaries so they could go. There are also other verses that show this, as well as Colossians 4:5 through 6, which shows that one should take every opportunity they are given to witness.
Yeah. So there are a number of reasons why not using the free market. So I guess why using the free market might be a poor decision. The Bible talks a lot about submission to government. You look at Romans 13:1 through 7. It's a good passage. Let me pull that up real quick. So 13:7 especially. Render therefore to all their due, taxes to whom taxes are due, customs to customs, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. And you could take that verse to mean that, doing this behind the government's back isn't a good option. You could also argue that it's dealing falsely or deceptively, which is talked about in Leviticus 19:11, or rendering to Caesar what is Caesar's, which is similar to the Romans 13:7 passage. So those are kind of the two alternatives, or use it or don't use it. Yeah. So I guess we can start some discussion then. So I guess I should talk a little bit about what sort of an exchange this is. So this is called a Hawala transaction. We did some research into that. Kind of like they were talking about in the case study, it's like one big organization, or sometimes it can be less official. It can be just two individuals who've worked out a deal. Like one of them owes the other money because of some deal they did in the past. Then it's like, okay, well, if they give you money here, I'll give money to someone else here. And that's just kind of how these work. Like theoretically, they could also be transferring money illegally. They didn't say, they like, we don't need to know how they're doing what they're doing. They're probably fine. So what do you guys think? Do you think exchanging money this way is wrong? Do you think finding loopholes is an okay thing?
Well, what does the government think about it?
I researched that and I'm not willing to share that opinion quite yet. We'll talk about that in a bit. That'll come up later.
Oh.
I don't want to end this right now.
But then we can go home.
Let me ask you a question. You said two options, but within those options, are there sub-options, variations of those options?
I was starting to think about this yesterday. It might not be that big, but they were talking about how they have to kind of cut back on ministry to pay for the missionaries. So if they don't use the free market, is there a chance that they could redo the budget where that ministry is more important than paying the missionaries? But
I was actually, okay, I see what you're saying. I was actually asking about exchanging on the free market, the open market, I think it's called.
Free or open, either way.
Is there more than one way to exchange on that market?
It didn't really seem that way. Not like that. So you have to go through like a government approved bank or something otherwise.
I was thinking that there was another way to do it. You're still using the open market, but they mentioned an alternative way to do it, which would keep you more incognito.
it's kind of like, I had a diagram. They could go to someone from the open market, which will send it to like someone like in America, and then
Right. So the open market is pretty under wraps. It's
yeah,
like
and then
they wouldn't know.
America would send it back, or send something back in order to accuracy.
No, so like when they were talking about, so there's the black market obviously, but then there's the free market or open market. And in talking about that, they did talk about how it wouldn't be clear that they were the ones doing anything, even if it was illegal, just because of the way it's set up. They wouldn't really be handling the money. It would just, they'd give the money on one end and it would come out the other. So like they wouldn't know who the money was going to or anything like that either. So it would be fairly incognito. No one would really know.
So there's not really two options in the open market. It's the option between the black market and the free market. Because the black market, they would be bringing the money in themselves, which is illegal.
Okay.
So the difference is black market, they're doing it themselves, and then the free market, they're like paying someone to do it for them.
So
Is that basically?
the free market, we're not sure if they're actually transferring money.
Yeah.
But there's like a large possibility that
Yeah.
they're paying someone to.
I don't know. From my research, it doesn't seem like it's that
Okay.
way, but it could be.
But,
It's a
yeah.
possibility.
It's very open air, so like you kind of don't know what they're doing. But
Yeah, I really think it kind of all depends on what the government thinks about this free market or this trading around. Because if the government is okay with it, then that means like it's legal. There's no, it won't put any blotch on your Christian testimony. You can do it in full faith. If the government's like, yeah, we know this goes on and we can't stop it, but we really don't like it, then I think that's an issue of Christian testimony where you have to be like, let's not do that for the sake of obeying government, even though we don't necessarily, even though we could get around it. So, I don't know. I think that's like the main factor it depends on for me, because God wants ministry to continue. He can provide the money, even if this kind of nice route doesn't work. When we take things into our own hands and start doing what we want instead of what we know God has commanded us, like going against His commands to do that, that's the moment that things will go downhill.
And by the way, this is not unique at all to India. This type of thing happens all over the place. It's happening in our country. You know, it's just more obvious or less obvious in some places. How about Argentina? Have you played the black market there in Argentina? It's being recorded, remember, so.
Yeah, so like in Argentina, we have several types of like what we call the dollar exchange. So you have the regular dollar, which right now is like 220 something probably. I'm not 100% sure. And then you have the dollar blue, which is the one that people actually like go for, which right now is like 400. I'm not sure. It keeps like going up and down lately. And so like technically the dollar is 200, but no one actually goes for that. So technically the dollar blue is illegal, but the government really doesn't care. Like you have like exchange houses that you just go and you get the 400 and the government knows, but they just don't really care. Like it's in the law, but at the same time, they kind of don't, like they don't enforce it.
And you can bet your boots that the reason they don't is because there's some political advantage in it for the government.
Yeah. And so like we've gone to the exchange houses and gotten the 400 or whatever. And even if you talk to people, they don't think it's wrong. It's like, if the government doesn't care and they're the ones that put the law, it's kind of.
So why should they care?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, like that's why if we know what the government thinks about this, it could potentially change the situation.
And Argentina's struggling right now, is it the economy?
Yeah, like my parents keep like sending like updates on what the dollar looks like, and it's just like all over the place.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's bad.
When I was researching it, I actually found like the biggest like news thing was the U.S. looking into Argentina, like money exchanges. I was just like,
Yes.
oh, okay.
Yeah, it's bad. Bye.
So are you cutting deals over there with Benson or with Jordan to pay your bill too? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very common. What we're dealing with here is just very, very common. That doesn't make it right. I'm just saying it is.
So would you say if the government is like the one in Argentina, then it would be more okay?
Yeah, like for me personally, I wouldn't see something particularly wrong with it.
Okay.
But if the government is against it, then maybe a little more.
So in one way, it's like Argentina in that it's a very common practice.
Mhm.
People transfer money like this regularly. Like at this point, with this case study, they get about twice as much out of it
Yeah.
as with the official exchange rate, kind of like you were saying. Like, it is a common practice.
How open is it? Like, is it anyone can know where these places are to
Sort of.
the money
It's
or?
like they're not like advertising themselves.
Yeah.
In like the United States and places like that, they do kind of advertise themselves.
Discreet.
Right. Generally not open.
Okay. That's different.
It's like mouth to mouth. It's like, hey, we know this place.
I know a guy.
I know a guy.
Yeah. Argentina's funny because like it's technically illegal, but you find like pamphlets on the street that are like, hey, Street House and South Street. So yeah.
So which cultural value are we really discussing here? The 10 cultural values.
Universalism in particular.
Yeah. And one thing you have to keep in mind is that if there's a chance of being caught and, if the government may not take action against its own people if they're doing it, but it may have a different attitude toward expats. You got to keep that in mind too. So that's not fair. But that is, and every country is going to be different. I don't know how that would play out here, the difference between Indian citizens and foreigners.
The one problem I did see with that is if one missions agency gets away with it, maybe some other missions agencies will catch on to that and be like, oh, this works. But then if so many missions agencies are doing it and then one gets caught, then all of them are gonna go down.
So, one of the guy that they were talking to from the other organization that was, like, I'm not sure if this is a good idea. It's like, would you get caught and deported? He says, I don't know how they exchange the money, but I'm sure they know what they're doing. After all, the company advertises widely in American magazines and is well known on the international scene. Besides, we are not the ones bringing rupees into the country.
Yeah. We're pawning it off on somebody
So,
else.
does it make a difference if you're not the ones actually doing it?
What do we call that in legal terms in our system? You're not the one actually doing it, but what's the term for that?
Instigator, kind of?
Accomplice?
Yeah, accomplice or guilt by association. Yeah, the idea of being an accomplice. So does that figure in, to this?
If they can't trace it back.
We're also called to be above reproach, not any appearance of evil. And this is connected with the questionable.
It's funny, Val, that some of the things that we in our culture would consider questionable because of the types of things we're mentioning here, people who live in those contexts, who've lived that all their lives, would not even consider it questionable. If the government closes its eyes to it, then it's okay. So even the way that you perceive questionable or non-questionable can be different depending on where you live.
I will say, would the example of like Nike and them be kind of the same way?
How's that?
Because we're buying products, and let's just say it's true that like they're doing illegal stuff to their workers or whatever.
Like building them in sweatshops and things like that.
Like, is that a good example to compare it to? Because we're buying something from them. We could know that they're doing something illegal.
Let's ask Caleb. He's wearing Nike shoes. Who else got Nike shoes on?
I got Under Armour.
Under Armour. Oh, come on, man. They got to be doing the same thing Nike's doing.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, okay, so so what do you guys think? Just take that as an example. Is this the same discussion we're having here, or does that fall into a different category?
Can you repeat that again?
So basically, she was talking about how they have to be above reproach. Like, if we're guilty by association, would buying products from Nike, who does like illegal stuff to like the shops or whatever, would that be the same way? Because they're doing something legal, we're just buying something.
If I could rephrase that, it seems to be fairly common now that anybody that's a thinking person says, okay, some things that we're wearing were probably made by slave labor. So, do we stop wearing those things? That's a related question.
Is there a difference? Because, like, I'm not saying there's, I'm just wondering, like, with like Nike and those things, they go through so many other parties before they actually come to us. Whereas with this, it'd be like you're directly in contact with them.
So question of how directly involved you are in,
Does that affect? I don't.
good question. What do you guys think?
I would say because you still don't know what's going on with the trade with the money, like there still could be multiple different parties involved still. Because you kind of just go to a person and hope that you're getting the money back.
Is there a difference between asking someone to get you something or buying a product already made?
That's what I didn't know if that was.
What would be the difference? I'm not sure I understand.
So, like-
the question.
Nike products.
Okay,
They're already there in the store.
right? Oh, okay.
It's like you buy them, but they're already like, it's already done, whatever it is.
Hmm.
With the money exchange, there would be some more of a, can you do this for me? And more like a deal thing. There's like a closer, even though, yeah, there's a lot of things that go like in the money thing and stuff. But it's more of a deal that you have with the money people than when Nike is, okay, like I'm buying your product, but it's not like something that really links me to the company in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Besides me showing off whatever it is that
Mm-hmm.
they're selling.
Okay.
Could it be more of a scenario like if it were to be closer tied, like if like you're owning a shoe shop and you're like
Yeah,
directly purchasing Nike from there,
that's what.
versus you're just a customer.
Hmm. It's kind of like that old, it doesn't happen so much today, but I remember growing up, I remember Christians saying, I will not go into a restaurant that serves alcoholic beverages. Well, now nobody says that because you can't. I mean, maybe McDonald's, but if you know, fast food places, but any sit-down restaurant that I know of serves alcohol. So why did it become a non-issue? Because you can't go out to eat anymore if you do this, or because there's something more to it than that? I know a guy that called a hotel and canceled a reservation because he found out that in the hotel restaurant, you know, they serve alcoholic beverages. And he said, well, I'm sorry, I'll have to cancel my reservation. I don't know where he found another reservation, unless he found a hotel that doesn't have a restaurant. You know? So, you know, this is the type of thing we're dealing with. Is a secondary being accomplished secondary, tertiary, you know, how far, go back to you, is it your question, Val?
Yeah.
How far removed do you have to get from something before it's okay to be involved?
The reality is there's going to be sin in any.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, Caleb, there's no way you can go out and buy yourself a pair of Nikes and have any clue whether or not slave labor was involved in it. I mean, just absolutely no. I mean, if we had documentation to prove that Nike is using slave labor, period. I mean, that's the main. Okay, but there would be an outcry. But you're not. You're hearing, oh, but Under Armour probably does the same thing, and you know, whoever makes Hey Dudes, and on and on. We live in a broken world. And there's only so much you can do to avoid, you know, to avoid contact to some degree with corruption. I mean, don't think that even if you exchange money through the bank, that there's not corruption going on in the bank system. You're you're not gonna exchange money anywhere without touching corruption somehow.
Oh, yeah, that's kind of one of the big points is there is corruption in the government. That's why it's getting cut out or cut back.
Mhm.
And that's why they're trying to decide if it's an option for the free market.
Right. That's a part of why they're only getting like their 4.3 rupees per dollar instead of 8 they got before.
Mhm.
So a lot of that is just the corruption there. And does that corruption make it okay to go to other sources? If there's an unjust law, are you justified in breaking it?
Does one sin justify the next one?
Yep. That's the question.
I don't think so.
That's a good answer.
Trying to word it not quite like that, but yeah.
No, I think like the main issue is honoring the government, even if they are unhonorable. Like the scripture says, to give honor to whom honor is due. In the context of the government, which at that time Romans I don't think was particularly great. And so I think the fact that the main focus should be on the Christian being obedient, submissive to the government, even if they could get more money out of it. Even if everybody does do it, the fact that you don't will make you look generally like a fool. Why wouldn't you get double your money? But that also gives reasons for you to say, well, I'm not doing it because of this. And the life that is backed, or the testimony that is backed up by something a bit more costly, like losing half of your income, does go to show that what you're giving is really real and that really does matter.
So Caleb, what is the motivation presented in Romans 13 for obeying government?
Yeah, because God has put them in place.
Period.
And to clarify then, yes, Hawala transactions are illegal in India. They're almost entirely illegal there, and they're technically illegal in a lot of US jurisdictions as well. I didn't check to see exactly which ones. So it's like, definitely not a legal thing. It's a thing that
Mhm.
can't really be traced back to
Mhm.
you, but it's not.
Yeah.
So in light of that, what other alternatives are there?
I just tack on some of what you just said. Even if it's not viewed by the nationals, I'm going back to something I said earlier, as an expat, you have to consider that factor. It's a big factor. It's a big factor.
And it's not like the illegal where they're, oh, it's illegal, but we're not really going to enforce it. No, India is like very unhappy about this, that it's going on. And they are taking whatever measures they can to stop it, but they just really can't trace it.
Is it safe to say that you are playing the system if you get involved in this? And that, we all know that little phrase, playing the system, is not an honorable statement, right? We're working the system. Is anybody here okay with that? I mean, let me ask you this. I mean, it's an open discussion. Is there anybody who would say, I think it's perfectly legitimate? If you do, maybe you don't want to speak up. Just because corruption exists on all levels, like I said to you, even if you go through the banking system that they have established, you're still going to be dealing with corruption. That's fine, you are, okay? But that's something you have no control over. You have to have money to live there, and if you don't, what are you going to do? Not get any money out because the whole system is corrupt? I don't think God expects that. But that's different than what we're dealing with here. This one guy, I don't remember which guy it was, Philip or Steve, kept saying, maybe it was both of them, kept saying, look how much money he's going to give us, and and
I think Philip's the one promoting it mostly. Yeah, Steve's the one that's kind of worried about it. But yeah, Philip's, hey, it'll be be more money, it'll be more money. We can keep doing our ministry. We can be paid like normal and continue the ministry.
Mhm. So, back to your question, what do they do? Are you kind of assuming that we're moving over into the category of we're not gonna deal in the open market, what do we do?
I think so. If we've determined that it's illegal, and from our discussion, I think
Is everybody ready for that? I mean, are we ready to say, let's not get involved in the open market? Let's consider the alternatives in the, whatever it is, illegal market. So, okay, go ahead, Isaac.
so. Yeah, I guess I'm just kind of opening it up. Like, what other alternatives are there?
Wait, I thought we weren't gonna use the open market.
Right, we're not. So like with sticking with the government approved system, how could they move funds around? How could they find a better way to distribute funds? I don't know.
I guess my question earlier that I brought up was because they're probably going to move funds for the ministry to paying the missionaries. So would you see that as wrong? Would you try to maneuver it so ministry gets more? Or what would you guys think?
Are you asking who establishes the budget? Is that the
Yeah.
question? Who decides who gets how much? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. Or it's,
What is ministry?
I think are they church planning? And then also, I think there's a school involved.
I believe that's correct. Yeah, they've planted more than 20 small churches since World War II. And yeah, they've got 2 dispensaries and a dozen small village schools.
Run by churches.
Yeah.
To train their people how to read.
Caleb's question is really good and it's complex. Just to give you an example from Brazil, we had really good, solid missionaries, godly people who understood the culture well, who were on 2 sides of the issue of whether or not you can report having a maid in your home as a ministry expense. There were some that would swear by no, the maid that's a domestic help, so you cannot turn that in because missionaries have to support to 2 countries. They have to support to their host country, and then they also have to report to the U.S. government because their dollars come from there. And there were other missionaries that said, no, the reason that I have a maid is so that my wife can be involved in the ministry. If she were not involved in the ministry, we would not have a maid. So therefore, the maid becomes legitimate ministry expense. There are things like that. That's just one example that people debate. To what extent is this expense considered a ministry expense? To what extent is it a family expense or something else? It's a good question.
I think my first thought is like if they have 20 church plants, like they can just start honestly praying with the 20 church plants. Not to say God will guarantee just like drop money whenever you ask for it. But if God does own the cattle on 1,000 hills and you're trying to honor him by not working the system, there's a sense in which when you obey God, God does, like God is with you. He will provide for the glory of his name, whatever that looks like. So honestly, that's my first response. And then what to do in the meantime, I guess that's the harder question.
Usually there are ways to get around it. In Brazil, when the currency changed from the Cruzeiro Novo to the Real, which is the current, overnight, instantaneously, we all lost 30% of our buying power. Just like that. And you're experiencing something different with the,
Well, they had something like that happen in 2001, I think it was. They call it the Corralito, which also like it's kind of like the Great Depression because money changes and also like, people lost a lot. And even until now, people still haven't really recovered.
But what I would like to say as a testimony is that the missionaries didn't panic. We had to do some rearranging of our priorities. We had to stop funding some national projects that we were funding, tell the nationals you're going to have to pitch in more. We just had to. And it actually became a good thing for us. It was a good discipline. It was a good learning experience. It was a good gesture of trusting God to provide. And most of us did end up writing back to our churches and saying, hey, this happened. And churches did come back. Not that everybody got back up, recovered all 30%, but the churches did come to, which also raises another question for me in this. Isn't there something conspicuously missing in this equation? Pardon? Who is missing in the consideration of what to do here?
God.
Well, yeah, there are times, especially these guys, where it does seem like maybe where's God in this, but what other?
Talking about the organization.
No, the organization's involved. They have delegated it, so they, what's that?
Churches.
Where's the church? Where's the sending church? To me, in a situation like this, if you're on the field and you're the one that's dealing with this, you should be in contact with your sending church and saying, here's our situation. We need counsel. Now, the reason that the organization turned it over to this committee is because the organization said, we're out of touch. We don't know. You guys know the situation better than we do. Okay, and that's okay. Okay, but still, I don't think that relieves you of the responsibility in case it's right back and says, hey, we're in a conundrum here. You guys are supporting us. You're praying for us. This is a financial situation, and get the church involved. I'm not saying the church is going to necessarily know what to do, but not to involve the church in this, I think, is to leave a big piece out of the puzzle.
Yeah, and right now it's pretty much looking like it's all on Mary's hands.
Mhm.
Like whatever Mary decides is
Yep.
what's going to happen.
Very, quite contrary.
So it's like if they should be able to go to somebody else to get counsel rather than relying on one person to figure out which side is best.
And should a woman take that decision? Another issue.
Try not to get to that point.
9 minutes.
It's the last class. We're going to throw all. No, it's not the last class. You got one more.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, even if the pastor says, I don't know, you've involved the pastor, you've asked him to pray, and I just think that's huge. The centrality of the church is nowhere to be found in this situation. It's not right for Mary to be stuck with this.
Yeah.
Well, it's your call. We're divided, so break the tie. By the way, I don't know how you break the tie because there's 4 people on the committee. I didn't figure that one out. Steve?
I was like,
Yeah, I don't know. That confused me a little bit too.
Well, the women
but
get
there
2
was
choices,
also
I think, vote.
the other members.
Maybe there are more people on the committee besides
Yeah.
I was
that.
gonna say, there must be more on the committee.
Okay, anyway.
Or at least one more.
Yeah.
People would be a very annoying committee. That would suck.
I know.
Yeah.
Never agree on anything.
I mean, don't you guys think, some of you have been in situations financially where you've just had to trust God because something happened unexpectedly, you've lost some buying power. There are wonderful, wonderful opportunities to trust God and to see people come together and have to, it's a good thing for churches and these organizations, these schools or whatever's involved, they have to face crisis together and say, let's pray and ask what God would have us to do. And see the hand of God at work. Lala, you haven't spoken up yet. Do you have an opinion on this? So have we all kind of come to the conclusion that just because the government doesn't do anything about it doesn't necessarily mean it's okay? Yeah. If the government has declared it as illegal, then how the government responds to or enforces or doesn't enforce its own laws is not really your main consideration here.
With that, I mentioned speed limits in one previous discussion. Those are technically labeled as by the government as illegal to go over that speed, but they don't enforce below a certain amount.
Or rolling stops. Who here stops at a stop sign? I mean, you do. Okay, if you do,
I normally do.
I don't.
My dad makes me so.
I do a hard coast.
Hard coast.
And my feeling is, even now, even when you see a stop sign, nobody translates that as the tires completely stop. It has taken on a connotation because of permissiveness on the part of the law. But see, we got to be careful. If you start using a little example like a rolling stop to try to legitimize something of this magnitude, I think you're being unfair. You're being imbalanced. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah, you could argue it's the same principle. The police aren't going to stop you for a rolling stop. However, if you see a police car, if a police car is behind you and you come to a stop sign, what happens?
Stop.
I stop. Look, I'm just being honest with you. I'm a product of my culture here as well. Okay, I'm just being honest. But if you start using little bitty, things like that in order to justify things of a larger magnitude, I do think that you're being unfair in the way that you go about it. Okay. What's the consequence of you coming down to a half mile an hour as opposed to doing what they're doing here? They're not the same. They're not the same thing. So we've said this how many times. We live in an imperfect world, so some of these things are not going to be as black and white as we'd like them to. But the fact that they're not black and white doesn't mean that we can take the liberties that some people would take to take advantage of the system. And I would encourage all of you in a case like this not to get involved in this open market. I just would. I would encourage you to just trust. Look at this as an opportunity for you and the people you work with to trust God to provide in some really cool ways that will magnify His name. Now, one thing that's not mentioned here, I don't know if this is fortunate for them, but it sounds to me like these are all Americans, right? This committee is all American. It becomes even more thorny sometimes if you're working with a combination of nationals and expats on the same committee. That can become even more difficult because they're going to have a different view. Even as dedicated Christians, they'll see it differently. And if you insist that you're not going to be a part of that, then you're also running the risk of them feeling like you're being critical of their culture. Like you know their culture better than they do. I mean, there are times when this becomes very thorny. That's why prayer and unity in the body of Christ is so very, very important when you approach things like this. Because not everybody's going to view it the same way, even in the Christian community.
Do you have any tips for if there are situations where even if it's clear in scripture and the other people aren't viewing it or they are interpreting the verses differently, how you still be unified?
Yeah. I'm reading a book right now written by a guy who talks about hermeneutics in different cultures. And he makes the statement, he's a Westerner, and he makes the statement that Westerners have come up with a hermeneutic that they think fits everybody's. Then all of a sudden Easterners will come up with they also believe in a literal hermeneutic, but they're applying it in their culture. Everybody applies their own hermeneutic in their own culture. And sometimes we do it with blind spots that we're not even aware of. We just assume that because it's the way it works in our culture, it's the way it has to be, just like Robert's Rules of Order. Obviously, if you're going to have congregational church government, every vote has to equal the same. Who says? See, can't the congregation make a decision where there are different levels of weight in different? So it is complex, and there's not an easy answer to that question. That's why I think the best way to approach is if you're coming up to a major decision like this, there needs to be a lot of prayer, a lot of study, a lot of conversation. Try to bring up about a unified answer. And sometimes even after you've done all that, one side or the other is going to end up feeling slighted in the decision. Which side should it be? Well, that's not an easy question to answer either. That's going to depend on the situation and who's involved. So, and I don't say that to discourage you when it comes to studying the Word and coming up with conclusions. I don't want to discourage you, but I do. You are going to be in situations like this. It doesn't happen every day. I'm not trying to tell you that every time you turn around, something's going to be happening. I was in Brazil for 19 years. There were a few isolated situations where we had to deal with something, like this, but that's not normally. This is not something these missionaries deal with all the time, every day. Okay, so don't get, but a lot of caution and care and prayer and Bible study. We had cases where we had to deal with decisions. We had people come in and present two different sides and give the scriptural, and then we had discussions. And sooner or later, you have to make a decision. And if it's a big enough deal that you can't in good conscience do it, you may have to separate yourself from the group. That has happened at times. So again, I'm not trying to scare you away. I'm just trying to be realistic. But it's not something that you're going to deal with all the time. These types of things happen as exceptions. Okay? So don't do it. Don't get involved.
No.
If you feel you need to step out of leadership because leadership's want to do something you can't do, then step out of leadership.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, thanks. All right. So we have one more time, and that's Cody.
Yes.
And what day is that? Is it Tuesday at 10? Can somebody?
I think 10 o'clock was Tuesday.
I think that's the hour we meet. So we'll be right back here.
Tuesday at 10.
Tuesday at 10 o'clock. Cody, you're on. We'll wrap things up. All right. Thank you.
Have extra time too.
What? What? We can go an hour.
Sign my yearbook.
Can we do it later so you can write more
Sure.
stuff?